All right, welcome everyone to our Green Schoolyard Lecture Series. Today is the fourth session in this series. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Lauren McKenna, and I'm with Green Schoolyards America, and I'm joined by my colleague Allison Torres, who is our operations manager, and Jonathan Okate, who's our regional program manager, and is helping to progress some of this work in Nevada. All right, so on to today's lecture, Green Schoolyards for Lifelong Physical Activity. We will be hearing from Dr. Marci Raney, who is one of our longtime collaborators with Green Schoolyards America. She is also a living schoolyard researcher and advocate, and we are quite frequently citing her work and including her in our other work. Um, I'm going to let her introduce herself actually today because her accolades are very, very, very long, and she does have a lot of wonderful research to reference. And I'm going to pass it off to her. Welcome, Marci. For those of you that have questions for Dr. Rainey as she's presenting, please pop them in the chat, and we will address them at the Q&A at the end. And if we haven't reached all of the questions, we will try to address them later and include them with the recording when we post it, probably in a week or so. So again, welcome, Marci, and take it away.
Thank you, Lauren and Green Schoolyards America. I'm honored to be here to share what I've learned in my journey as a researcher, a certified exercise physiologist, as well as a certified playground safety inspector. I'm a big living schoolyard advocate. I work very closely with several wonderful nonprofits at Green Schoolyards America, as well as with the Los Angeles Living Schoolyard Coalition. For over 15 years, my scholarly focus has been on physical activity and public health in the urban environment, and much of my work has been specific to the assessment of student well-being in asphalt and living schoolyards. I'd like to begin the presentation with an overview of the status quo and a reminder of why we are all here today and how important it is to continue to fight for nature access in our schools. Unfortunately, as reported by the Trust for Public Land, approximately 1 in 3 people, including 28 million children, do not have a quality park close to home. In addition to inadequate green space in our neighborhoods, a high percentage of schools are covered in asphalt. Large swaths of asphalt with high surface temperatures contribute to urban heat islands and temperatures that are on average 6 degrees hotter than the desert. It is predicted that average temperatures will increase 3 to 4 degrees in coastal areas and even more in inland areas by 2041. Because children are closer to the ground, they're closer to the radiant heat generated by asphalt. Prepubescent girls have lower sweat rates than boys, who have lower sweat rates than adults. Younger children also generate more body heat due to rapid growth. Unfortunately, children are less likely to perceive an increase in their own body temperature, and therefore they don't take the appropriate precautions to avoid overheating, such as seeking shade, consuming fluids, or taking breaks. This exacerbates dehydration, overheating, leading to dizziness, nausea, headaches, fatigue, and ultimately a decrease in exercise capacity. When these students return to the classroom, they have difficulty concentrating and learning. Additionally, the proximity of many schools to freeways leads to high pollution exposure. When children spend time in hot, polluted environments, they have an increase in heart rate and blood pressure, bronchoconstriction, as well as asthma. Recent studies show that asthma is a leading cause of chronic absenteeism. Some states, including California, fund schools based on average daily attendance rather than enrollment. Therefore, high absenteeism equates to billions of dollars lost in school funding and a growing economic burden in society. What's more, the United States is suffering from an inactivity epidemic. As reported in the U.S. Report Card on Physical Activity for Children and Youth, which is published by the Physical Activity Alliance, only 20 to 28% of all 6 to 17-year-olds meet the 60 minutes of daily physical activity guidelines recommended for well-being and healthy development. Overall physical activity rates are significantly lower even than this for girls, ethnic minorities, and students from low-income households. Only 10.3% of students aged 5 to 14 walk or bike to school, and this percentage has been steadily decreasing over the past 10 years. About 50% of children aged 6 to 17 participate in sports or lessons after school and on weekends. This percentage has also been dropping in the past couple of years. There's been a large increase in the amount of time students spend with screens, especially since COVID. Greater screen time is directly related to lower physical activity levels and unhealthy weight status. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends that children between 6 and 12 should sleep 10 to 13 hours a day, including naps. And youth between 13 and 18 should sleep for 8 to 10 hours per night. When parents were surveyed, they reported that only 64 to 67% of children meet these recommendations, which means more than 30% are not getting enough sleep. It's also been reported that 1/5 of U.S. schools meet the physical education requirements. And over 40% of schools do not consistently offer students an opportunity to be physically active outside of PE. Indeed, during the school day, students tend to have minimal breaks in sedentary time. These statistics have long-term negative consequences. Voluntary physical activity participation, unfortunately, will decrease as children get older if they are bored. It has been estimated that long-term physical activity habits and physical activity confidence are established already by the 4th grade, which makes early interventions critical. Both physical inactivity and obesity are strong predictors of poor cognitive functioning and academic performance. In addition, obese children are 7 to 10 times more likely to become obese adults with high risk for chronic disease and a lifetime of high out-of-pocket medical expenses. In addition to mandating multiple physical activity breaks throughout the school day, one solution to health and academic achievement inequities is to invest in high-quality, large-scale schoolyard greening renovations. The removal of asphalt, implementation of pervious surfaces, and planting of trees can effectively counteract aspects of climate change. Additionally, there's overwhelming evidence that living schoolyards, schoolyard forests, have a positive and powerful impact on the health outcomes of youth. Due to the overlapping and synergistic benefits of nature exposure and physical activity, including immune system function, brain development, improved focus and motivation, better sleep quality, etc., etc., it's important that living schoolyards are designed to enhance the curriculum, mitigate the urban heat island effect, as well as promote physical activity. In my research, the variables which have consistently had the positive impact on student play behaviors and well-being are the number of unique play areas, the physical separation of those areas, as well as the inclusion of specific nature-based design features. A greater number of unique play areas or spaces designed to serve a specific purpose such as a basketball court, an outdoor classroom, foursquare court, or even lines on asphalt, that's related to a better spread of students throughout the yard during recess. Fewer students spend recess sedentary, and a high number of pro-social collaborative play interactions can be recorded. Separating play zones with physical boundaries, such as logs and stumps, trees, shrubs, boulders, versus wide open spaces, helps to lower environmental noise, helps to suppress student anxiety, and for the most vulnerable student, improves a sense of safety and belonging. When schoolyards have more trees, permeable surfaces, and greater topographical diversity, which could come in the form of mounds and hills, or even different plant species, young bodies are more physically comfortable. They're less likely to overheat, and they're more likely to develop their motor skills and achieve physical activity literacy. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, students are less likely to experience boredom and more likely to experience joy. My research team compared activity levels across schoolyards with different square footage and a different number of unique play areas. Interestingly, the total number of students on the schoolyard relative to total square footage had no impact on population activity levels. Similarly, there was no relationship between the relative green space square footage and activity levels. For example, there was no difference in the percent of students sedentary, and shown in this figure is the red pie slices, between a schoolyard with 12% green space and another schoolyard with 50% green space, most of which was devoted to a large grass sport field. This suggests that nature-based permeable surfaces on their own are not sufficient to promote physical activity. It really doesn't matter how large the schoolyard is if you don't create spaces that students want to play in. We also observed lower population activity levels in play areas that were overcrowded. However, when multiple appealing play areas are available, students will naturally disperse, and overcrowding of those specific appealing areas is less likely to occur. The greater the number of the unique play areas is also related to a higher frequency of pro-social collaborative play. When there were more distinct play areas, students spent time in smaller groups. They came up with creative ways to engage with the space and with each other. These pro-social interactions are also more common in non-sport specific green areas. On multiple occasions at sites without physical separation of play areas, individual students have been observed trying to escape from the chaos and the noise created by the ball sports and the aggressive play, but they didn't have any place to go. If you stand on a schoolyard that's a big wide open space, you'll see ball games starting to bleed into one another and interrupt the quiet time that some students really need during recess. Ultimately, this leads to conflict between students and higher levels of sedentary activity. During observations conducted at multiple schoolyards, my team made note of the following. Benches and trees are often located on the perimeter of the schoolyard. This facilitates sedentary behavior in the only shaded area. Additionally, trees planted on the perimeter have little impact on the urban heat island. Because trees are isolated to the perimeter, there's a lost opportunity to use natural features to create that division of spaces, welcoming borders, and shaded paths of travel. Other researchers have shown that tree canopy coverage and topographical diversity increase the percentage of students with proficient or advanced scores in math and reading, while large expanses of land without trees actually had a negative impact on academic performance. Another research team showed that just being able to look at nature from their classroom helped them to recover from mentally challenging tasks and lower stress levels. My team has also evaluated the impact of design of individual spaces. This graph shows activity levels of girls and boys in different open fields. As demonstrated by the two sets of bars on the right, boys in blue were more active in grass fields than in asphalt fields. However, girls, represented by the yellow bars, were unlikely to be observed in the large rectangular grass field designed for sport. If they were in this field, they were typically walking through it just to get to another play area. This is in opposition to what we observed in a park-like grass field shown in this image. It was oblong in shape with trees planted throughout. In this space, girls were highly active, and they were observed engaging in gymnastics, dance, running, and tag, activities they enjoyed and were less competitive. Outdoor classrooms are common in living schoolyard designs. However, they aren't all created equal. The outdoor classroom represented by the green bar on the left was associated with lower activity levels, in part due to its very small size and the fact the logs and stumps were placed very close together. In addition, because it was one of the only areas on the yard that was shaded, it was also overcrowded, preventing students from engaging in physical activity. The outdoor classroom represented by the green bar on the right was one of multiple green zones on that schoolyard. It was significantly larger in size, and the logs and stumps were placed at varying distances between one another, which provided both the younger and the older students with motor skill challenge. Ultimately, activity levels in that outdoor classroom space were higher than any of the activity levels observed in asphalt spaces on that campus. Although the play structure zone is a highly popular area in schoolyards, it's frequently used, unfortunately, for sitting and standing in the shade under the structure on hot days. Play structures that are more appealing and lead to higher activity levels are those with unstable surfaces, such as a swing versus a solid metal bridge, multiple climbing and jumping options, such as stepping stones, miniature climbing walls, rope lattices. In addition, students are attracted to lots of space to run around between obstacles. So a traditional play structure doesn't allow for that division of spaces and hosting of multiple students. Natural, movable, non-fixed components can also assist with the development of upper body strength and coordination. The type of play observed in outdoor classrooms and play structures with unstable surfaces is associated with better child development and physical activity literacy. In the end, students learn how to move effectively through balance, coordination, and agility skills in a world that really isn't flat. Other studies have shown that the gaps or the space between many traditional play structure components, imagine a set of monkey bars or rungs in a ladder or ropes or jumping stones, they're always spaced exactly the same distance apart. Rather than inviting play, students' physical capabilities plateau and they get bored. Students prefer obstacles at different heights, different textures and shapes, and obstacles that are spaced in non-symmetrical patterns. As one researcher has been quoted in saying, the visual mess and disorder that would drive the average parent, let alone the visually trained architect, to distraction is actually prized by children. Due to the greater flexibility in how outdoor classrooms can be designed, as opposed to standalone plastic or metal play structures, it's possible to appeal to a greater number of students and to optimize their development at the same time. Studies have shown that elementary school students can easily navigate 24 to 36-inch gaps between stepping stones that are 5 inches off the ground. According to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, children between 5 and 12 can safely practice gross motor skills without putting themselves at risk for injury on elevated surfaces up to 30 inches in height. They can effectively navigate a balance beam that is only 4 inches wide and 16 inches high. Both those 30-inch obstacles and these balance beams do not require any guardrails to make sure the students are safe. Generally, it's recommended that a 6-foot buffer zone be extended around the perimeter of play areas in which students have the ability to climb and jump off elevated surfaces. This includes outdoor classroom spaces with logs and stumps, as shown in this image. It's also important that areas that invite jumping and climbing have surfaces that are safe for falling. Safe falling is actually positive and helps develop their motor skills and their physical capabilities. This would include engineered wood fiber, sand, grass. There are no universally accepted safety guidelines for a buffer zone around the perimeter of sport fields, courts, walking, running tracks, or other PE stations that don't allow climbing and jumping. However, studies have shown that elementary school students, regardless of their age, can, on demand, decelerate and stop from a full sprint within 5 to 6 feet. That's all the distance they need to stop, which means that play zones designed for maximal speed, high speed running should include a buffer zone of 6 feet without another obstacle. But if the zone is not designed for high speed running, you can have shorter distance in that space. No matter the quality of the design or the amount of appropriate safety measures considered, if students are not allowed to use their imagination and do not have the autonomy in how the space is used, the benefits of good design start to disappear. Indeed, the right to play is recognized by the United Nations as a fundamental right. The existing literature suggests that free play can facilitate the development of emotional intelligence, resilience, coping. During free play, children can use their imagination and creativity without adult interference, which leads to intrinsic motivation to be more physically active, inspiring creativity and self-exploration. Risky play is defined by thrilling and exciting forms of free play that involve uncertainty in outcome and a possibility of injury. It can be divided into positive or negative risk. Positive risk includes activities where the child is unlikely to be injured in a severe way. And negative risk includes inappropriate or unreasonably harmful behaviors. Results from data collected in the backyard area of the Natural History Museum in Santa Barbara, which is pictured here, demonstrates that students engage in negative risk behaviors in natural play areas less than 1% of the time. Despite the opportunities provided by the environment to support high levels of risk, most children will police their own behaviors, taking on those low or moderate risks, which will advance their development without risk for serious harm. Creating environments that children will utilize for risky play can promote the development of psychological competencies as well. They learn to navigate risk and overcome it without fear. There's studies that show that when children have this experience as young children, they're less likely to suffer from anxiety disorders as adults. Caregivers and teachers in Chicago public schools reported that schoolyards, despite an increase in activity levels, were safer. Students experienced fewer injuries, and there was less teasing and bullying after the Green Schoolyard renovations. This impact was persistent for up to 3 years throughout the duration of the study. Play zone assignments frequently place students in areas for extended time periods, areas that are not appealing and do not allow students to engage in the activities that they enjoy. So this class is assigned to this play zone for a week, and this class is assigned to this play zone for a week. Unfortunately, when students are assigned to zones in which they do not naturally appeal to, they spend the entire recess period sedentary. Several minutes of recess are wasted also because positive play is interrupted by supervisors redirecting students to their assigned zones. Research shows that interactions between students in different classes and age groups is actually beneficial to social development. Frequent interruptions of free play by adults decreases opportunities for students to learn how to resolve conflict on their own. In our research, when adult supervisors were more hands-off, there was actually less time spent tattling on other students, both during and after the recess period. Although it may be appropriate to teach rules of the game during physical education, as long as behaviors do not increase the risk of injuries to other students, students should be given the autonomy to make up their own rules and be creative. It should be encouraged rather than stifled. When adults do not dictate where and how children play, recess is more rejuvenating, helping to decrease anxiety and anger and restoring a sense of calm, independence, and enjoyment. In addition, if students are told to restrict their natural instincts to run and jump on the schoolyard, they will internalize the belief that activity is no good. In addition to free play, nature-filled schoolyards are conducive to instruction of multiple subject areas, including physical education. The Society of Health and Physical Educators, also known as SHAPE America, is the recognized authority for national physical education standards. Regardless of age group, all PE standards are related to the goal of improving physical literacy, which is defined as the ability to move with competence and confidence in a wide variety of physical activities in multiple environments that benefit the healthy development of the whole person. Although sport is one option for improving locomotor movement and body management skill proficiency, it is not the only way to achieve the standards. For example, improvements can be made by simply jumping on and off logs in an outdoor classroom or navigating spaces between boulders. In order to make progress on the standards, the physical education curriculum, as well as the physical education classroom, commonly outdoors, must motivate voluntary engagement and activity. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, nature-based play areas are related to higher voluntary physical activity levels, as well as pro-social interactions. When students have a positive, motivational experience in PE and/or lessons improve understanding of movement science, they're more likely to engage in physical activity outside of school to promote lifelong physical activity. Therefore, the goal should be to design PE instructional spaces outdoors in a way that enhances a student's willingness to give effort and challenge their physical limits. Unfortunately, Research shows that sport-based facilities and competitive PE environments tend to make girls underperform. They'll hide from the action and content and not put forth appropriate effort. This further exacerbates the inactivity gap between the genders. Alternatively, when baseline skill level is matched through activities like rock climbing, and when competitive play is not a focus, PE can be enjoyable for everyone. Research shows that when physical activity is performed in nature-filled spaces, the brain releases endorphins, and the perception of effort is significantly decreased, which leads to children and adults exercising at higher intensities for longer durations without feeling tired. Several studies have concluded that a sedentary lifestyle, rather than the environment, is the strongest predictor of injuries in physical education. Therefore, to decrease injuries, we need to increase activity. The living schoolyard movement has been progressing in parallel with evolution of physical education. Ultimately, activity and physical education instructed in nature-based schoolyards enhances student well-being through positive risky play, lower injury prevalence, opportunities for co-curricular connection, equity-focused activity opportunities and motor skill challenge, and physical literacy. That concludes my presentation for you all today, and I am excited to hear your questions.
Hey, thank you so much, Marci. That was wonderful. There's so much rich information, and I was taking my own notes of like, oh, like what are like the best, the like top 10 points from you. So I think I actually don't see a lot of questions here, but please, folks, put them in the chat. Um, I think like looking to that last thing that you talked about, the to decrease injury, increasing activity. I feel like that relates a lot to adults' perceived fear of what's risky and what's not risky. And um, at our last webinar, we talked with another like risky play researcher who said, we should make spaces as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. And so I don't know if what you would tell someone who still, even after hearing this research, even after hearing, everything that you're talking about is still like, well, but the kids are going to run into a tree or the kids are going to fall off something. I don't know if that's something you've run into where people are still not convinced.
So I think that there's definitely a concern more in the United States because there's been studies that assess the parents' willingness and acceptance of injury risk in other countries, including Australia. There's been big studies in Australia showing that parents are actually 100% okay if their children comes home with a bruised knee or a little bit of a cut on a lip from falling. They don't want major fractures in the long bones. But I think that
Mm,
the reason that we have so many students who get afraid, because we're actually inducing fear when we don't allow students that opportunity to fall, we're making that a fear in their mind, and that is going to have, like I said, long-term consequences on their mental health. And it's not just related to a fear related to physical activity. It's mental health anxiety that can kind of permeate other aspects of their life. So
mm,
being exposed to challenges and having to navigate and potentially have a minor injury at that young age where the students are going to recover quickly is really important. I think if we don't encourage that, what happens is that when students do fall at an older age or wait till they get into adulthood, and now those falls are going to be more serious, and it is going to lead to injuries that perhaps are not recoverable. I think that we have to give those children those opportunities to develop the motor skills to prevent the future onset of severe injuries and hospitalization potentially. We know that for adults over the age of 60, the number one reason that they go to the emergency room is because of falls. Imagine if we had continued to develop that motor skill and that balance proficiency at a young age and it was sustained.
Absolutely. And I'm also thinking about how much more injury happens in traditional sports, and adults and parents and guardians just accept that, like there is going to be injury. So I think like doing a brain shift on the overall health that nature play offers. Someone is asking, actually, this is kind of related to what you just talked about, but if there's any more advice you have on packaging information for parent-teacher groups or school administrators, in addition to what you just shared.
So I think one of the things that maybe would resonate with a parent is to say, do you take your child to the public park? And do they enjoy themselves in the public park? And the public park is going to have, if especially in parks that have not a lot of money devoted to maintenance, there might be a gopher hole here and there, for example. So that's an obstacle that the children might trip and fall, but it doesn't mean that you don't want to take your children to the park. The park is something that I think all parents, there's parents that, of course, that don't take their kids to the park, but I think in general, that's a really good thing that relates to their daily activities. And we're just trying to replicate those kind of experiences and environmental protections in a schoolyard that's safe. I would also say that there is actually, from a head impact criteria, so the biggest risk for children, serious injuries, of course, are head injuries, and parents get really nervous about head injuries. And there's good research that says that a engineered wood fiber surface can protect as long as the engineered wood fiber is thick enough, according to the U.S. Consumer Safety Protection Guidelines. As long as it's thick enough and maintained, it will protect from major head injury 100% of the time. If a child was to fall off of a play structure, which also parents tend to allow their children to do, stable play structures onto a rubber surface, that's actually not going to protect from head injuries 100% of the time. And it's because those rubber matting surfaces decrease their elasticity with repeat exposure to the sun. So it's actually less safe, right? And we're not, in a lot of these situations with nature-based features, we're not talking about falling off of 10-foot tall, 7-foot tall heights. We're talking about 30 inches usually is what the guideline is, and perhaps taller if there's guardrails, but they're not going to be falling from the same level of height. The research also shows that the severity of long bone injuries is more severe related to the surface than it is related to the height of the actual fall. So there's a lot of ways that we can kind of relate it to daily activities, but also using the science to show that the things that they think might be safer aren't really safer. It's the exact opposite. I don't know if I answered that question for whoever asked it.
That's great. I did not know that, or I've not heard it presented in that way about the surface versus the height. And yeah, and the reminder that most nature play and most like green schoolyards, they're not falling from 10 feet. They're falling from a log, like the one that's behind you,
Exactly.
which is not that high. And very typical of like a neighborhood park, that just has trees and stuff around, not including the playground. Someone is asking about similar research applying to adaptive physical ed for students with disabilities, and anything you want to speak to on that. I know you have in the past.
Yes, I really appreciate that question. I want to There's a couple of points that I want to address. First is physical disability, and then I also want to discuss some of the neurodivergent children. And I'm going to start with the neurodivergent children first. There's a lot of, and I'm going to talk specifically about physical education here, that when we have adapted physical education standards for a reason, and some of it is for the neurodivergent children who get overstimulated in really loud spaces, and when there's a lot of things that are going on that can distract them visually, auditory wise. So, what research has shown is that in the nature-based play areas, they're more calm, their blood pressure is lower, and there's not as much distraction so that they can focus better on the activity. And it's because of that calming energy that's released by nature. So that's the neurodivergent children. For children with physical, we have a perception sometimes in the United States that we should not be challenging students who have physical limitations, but similar to our able-bodied children, they also need physical challenges in order to properly develop and not suffer from prolonged sedentary activity in any part of their body, whether it be from a wheelchair or if they have limited control. We know that we tell children, for example, there was a student at the school that is behind me, Eagle Rock Elementary, who had, unfortunately, at a very young age, he had been diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And this student, you should have seen how much this student over the course of 3 years evolved in this space. And he actually was asking to play in the areas that all the other children were, and the other children respected his abilities and helped him. So I think that there's another way too to bring this into a social environment where we are encouraging able-bodied children to interact in nature-based places with non-able-bodied children and collaborating together so that everyone can achieve their enjoyment and be physically active. Not being physically active is more detrimental in the end.
Yeah, and thank you for addressing that. I know it can be a sensitive topic, and we have things in place for a reason, but you know, we've heard from some schools where, you know, there was something that prevented a project from happening because of like a particular requirement, and then the project didn't happen at all, and then no one benefited from that. And we've seen this also seems to be an opportunity for really, really creative, you know, engagement with the community about what they want, and how to include all the students. And yeah, I believe that a schoolyard that is more open to everybody ultimately benefits everybody.
And I will say also that the the point that I made about bullying on schoolyards that are asphalt schoolyards is real. And that is also harm. It's not physical harm, it's psychological harm. And there's research that shows that children that attend schools in this type of environment are constantly afraid of each other, of the bullies. And that bullying, multiple studies have shown that bullying goes down when students are actually drawn to a nature-based play. They have another way to exert their energy and engage with each other more collaboratively. And so we also have to remember that there's more than just physical harm. There's also potential for psychological harm. And I would never disagree with ADA standards. We have to have path of travel. We have to make sure that students can get to the spaces just like everyone else. We just don't need to restrict every single thing in the space so that no one can be physically active. Create a synergistic area where children can collaborate and work together.
A question that I have relates back to what you're talking about, like the when a project has been put in and maybe there's like an immediate conflict because the kids are like trying to like figure out like new roles and how to use the space, or like the shiny new thing on the schoolyard, and or some overcrowding at least initially, but that they ultimately work it out. Do you have any advice to school staff on either how to like kind of help facilitate that transition, or maybe they just need to like step back and let it happen?
I think that's a great question. And it comes actually, the work begins before the construction happens. If the students are engaged in deciding how their schoolyard looks and how it's designed, then they start to establish a sense of ownership of the space and they want to protect the space and use it appropriately, knowing that this is mine. Just like if they had their own room, they want to make sure that it's protected and nobody is messing it up. So they'll start to police each other in these situations. And like I said, conflict resolution, lots of good play and recess, independent of living schoolyard research, shows that if students are given the tools early on to resolve conflicts on their own and know that it's not automatically an opportunity to go tattle on someone else to an adult. And then also, if this is the space that they built and they want to spend time in, knowing that there's a threat that they may have to spend time in the non-nature-based play area is something students don't want to be faced with.
Mm.
Never take away free play opportunities as a punishment. But, even the threat of you have to play now in another area because you aren't actually respecting the space or your classmates, that can be a really effective tool. But I think that what we saw, there was no intervention needed because the students were involved from the very beginning in the design process. And then as soon as they figured out what places they like to play and the kind of different things that were opportunities, it worked. They did it themselves. No one had to intervene.
Mm. Maybe this is a longer question, but do you have any research offhand on bullying statistics and if not, something you can share with people later?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
On statistics related to bullying
Bullying, yes, I
in
have.
in the schoolyard.
I can provide some studies that specifically looked at bullies. The Chicago school papers reference bullying and how it went down with after the Green Schoolyard renovations, and there's a couple of other articles that talk about when students are more physically active during recess, that there's actually less bullying. Some of that is in the reference list that I sent as well.
Okay, wonderful. Um, Someone is asking a little bit about like sample language. So Redding is saying we work in school gardens and place boulders around the garden spaces for seating and play, but so many educators are scared of kids climbing and jumping off of them and don't like to hear pushback. Any suggested sample language to use in the moment when you're working with risk averse teachers?
I think I would the for boulders in particular, if you look at that image from the backyard, has anyone been to the backyard, the Natural History Museum in Santa Barbara? If you have a chance, go. The researchers did multiple weeks of observations, and children, there's boulders everywhere. There's a dry creek bed. There is another water play area, which that's a whole nother issue, water play. But we also know from our work with preschool children that these type of engaging and interesting areas of play and building opportunities are going to be preferred for student development. The if the students, I like to use the language of what if we don't? What is the risk if we don't allow the students an opportunity to climb on that boulder or engage with this particular nature-based feature? Our risk is that these children are not going to learn. And we are going to get to a point after so many years in elementary school that they will have surpassed their ability to develop those motor skills. So if we don't give them those opportunities at that younger age, they're never going to develop it. That's just how the physiology of our body works. So I would go from the stance of you're actually causing more harm than good by preventing them from interacting with the space.
Someone else is asking about they're asking about LA schools, but I would broaden this to any school that is experiencing high heat events. Have you done, I mean, actually, I know that you have a little bit. Have you done any research on how heat affects overall physical activity, such as canceled recess, moving activity indoors? And have you found that some schools can keep recess on because they have a cooler playground and they don't have to cancel recess?
So I don't know of schools that have quite made that transition yet because they haven't been convinced of the research for that microclimate in the schoolyard that on very hot days that they can prevent the students from allow the students to go outdoors in the nature-based area. We do know that there's research that shows that you can actually lower microclimates, but it has to be at least 40% tree canopy coverage. So, and that is kind of a threshold, at least 40% tree canopy coverage for a significant decrease of the temperature that would be affecting children's ability to exercise at their full capacity without overheating.
Mm.
I think the other thing that I will point out, independent of what the design is, that students need to be encouraged and reminded they don't have a sense of when they're getting hot. So, reminding students on those hot days to take a break, consume fluids, and having enough tree canopy coverage that they can take those breaks in the shade, not up against a building, but in the shade of a tree. It's significantly cooler. And we know that the hottest places on the schoolyard are going to be the rubber matting under the play structure and the asphalt that's exposed.
Thank you. That's very helpful advice, especially for us here. I know it's December, but we still get hot days even in the wintertime. Um, I think we're nearing time, but I wanted to thank you one more time for sharing your expertise and time, like so willingly and so often. This has been absolutely wonderful, and I think a really hot topic right now. For those of you in the room, we will share a recording of this soon, and please share with your friends who are not able to join today or forgot or had something else going on. Um, I'll put in the chat a few of the references that Dr. Rainey mentioned, as well as a reminder for our community of practice, which we will restart in 2026. We'll continue this webinar series as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your participation and happy holidays.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday.